In the weeks that followed, the center came alive. There were storytelling nights, cooking classes, and history clubs. Children learned to quilt alongside grandmothers, while teenagers discovered carpentry skills from retired carpenters. Elders who had once sat silently at home found themselves surrounded by friends, their wisdom valued and their voices heard. One afternoon, as I watched a circle of children listen intently to Mr. Harris recount tales from his youth, my daughter-in-law entered quietly. She lingered by the doorway, arms folded, her expression unreadable. For months, she had kept her distance, watching from the sidelines, skeptical of everything I built. But this time, she didn't turn away. After the session ended and families began to leave, she approached me. Her voice was low, hesitant. "I didn't understand before," she admitted. "I thought you were chasing attention, trying to prove something. But I see now, you're giving them something I couldn't, something none of us could." I studied her face, searching for insincerity, but found only vulnerability. "It was never about proving myself to you," I said gently. "It was about proving to myself that I was more than the limits placed on me. And now it's about proving to everyone else that they are too." For the first time, her eyes softened. She nodded, then glanced at the children still giggling in the hall. Maybe I could help with organizing or planning events." I smiled. "We'd love to have you." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings are more powerful than endings. As months turned into years, the foundation grew roots deeper than I could have dreamed. Grants came in, partnerships formed, and young people who once saw elders as outdated now flocked to learn from them. The walls of our center became covered with photographs, drawings, and handwritten notes, a living museum of love, laughter, and legacy. And though my hair grew whiter, my steps slower, my spirit soared. I had found my place, not as just the babysitter, but as a bridge builder, a storyteller, a force that turned pain into purpose. One evening, at the close of a particularly lively gathering, my grandson tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, you're kind of famous now." I chuckled. "Not famous, sweetheart, just remembered. And that's all I ever wanted." Years from now, when I am no longer here, I know this foundation will stand. The seeds we planted will continue to grow, tended by hands younger than mine, but guided by the wisdom of those who came before. And maybe, just maybe when someone looks at an elder and thinks, "just," they will stop and remember this story. They will remember that no one is ever just anything. We are roots, we are bridges, we are legacy. And legacy never dies.
Winter arrived, crisp and unforgiving, yet the warmth of our growing community never dimmed. The garden, now asleep beneath blankets of snow, had become more than soil and seeds. It was a symbol, a reminder of what we had built together. But as the seasons changed, so too did my vision. I knew we needed something permanent, something that would last long after my hands could no longer guide it. One evening, sitting at my kitchen table with a fresh pot of tea and my worn notebook, I wrote 3 simple words at the top of the page: a living legacy. That phrase would become the heart of my next mission. I didn't just want a foundation that lived on paper or in memories. I wanted an institution, a place where stories, skills, and traditions could be preserved and passed down. With the help of volunteers, neighbors, and even the mayor, we petitioned for a small building on the edge of town, an unused community center that had long been gathering dust. After weeks of paperwork and persistence, we were granted the keys. I still remember the first time I unlocked the doors. The air inside was stale, the paint chipped, the floors scuffed. But I saw not decay, only possibility. Here I envisioned rooms filled with laughter and learning, children sitting cross-legged as elders shared stories, workshops where retired craftsmen taught their trades, a library of oral histories recorded for future generations. We held a ribbon-cutting ceremony on a chilly Saturday morning. Families gathered, bundled in coats and scarves, their breath rising in clouds against the bright winter sky. My granddaughter stood beside me, clutching the scissors too big for her small hands. Together, we cut the ribbon, and the crowd erupted in cheers. The Whitmore Family Foundation finally had a home. Inside, we wasted no time. Volunteers painted the walls in warm colors, local businesses donated chairs and tables, and families brought books, crafts, and keepsakes to share. Slowly, the dusty building transformed into a vibrant hub of connection. On opening day, I stood before the crowd, my heart thudding with both nerves and pride. "This place," I said, "is not mine alone. It belongs to every person who has ever been told they are just something. It belongs to every child who longs to know their roots and every elder who longs to be seen. Here, we are not invisible. Here, we are not forgotten. Here, we are family." Applause filled the room, but more importantly, so did hope.
The laughter, the conversations, the clinking of glasses, everything went still. All eyes turned to her, then to me. The same words, the same wound, laid bare in front of the entire neighborhood. I could have shrunk. I could have swallowed the humiliation like I did the first time, but not anymore. Not now. I straightened my shoulders, met her eyes calmly, and said, "No, I am not just the babysitter. I am a builder of bridges, a guide, a root that keeps this family and this community steady. And the work I do is proof that none of us are ever just anything." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by clapping, tentative at first, then louder, stronger, until it rolled like thunder. My neighbors stood with me, not against me. Even the children tugged at my skirt, their eyes shining with pride. My daughter-in-law's face flushed crimson. She turned away, but the damage, or rather the healing, was already done. I was no longer the invisible figure she could dismiss with a word. I had spoken my truth, and the world had heard it. That night, as I sat alone on the porch, the autumn air cool against my skin, my son joined me. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he placed a gentle hand over mine. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said at last, his voice breaking. "I should have defended you sooner. I let her words go unchecked because I didn't want to stir conflict. But tonight, you showed all of us who you really are, and I've never been prouder to call you my mother." Tears spilled freely down my cheeks. For years, I had longed for acknowledgement, not from strangers, not even from my neighbors, but from my own flesh and blood. And here it was, simple and sincere. From that moment, everything changed. My daughter-in-law remained cool, still struggling to accept the shift in power, but she could no longer deny what others saw. And as time passed, even her resistance began to soften, though slowly, grudgingly. Meanwhile, the foundation soared. We launched literacy programs, senior craft fairs, and oral history projects recorded for the local museum. The mayor invited me to speak at a civic luncheon, and parents asked how their children could become more involved. One evening, during a storytelling circle, I noticed something remarkable. Families who had once sat separately now mingled freely. Children leaned on grandparents, neighbors laughed together, and the invisible wall between generations crumbled a little more each time we gathered. I realized then that my humiliation had been the seed, but the growth belonged to everyone. My story had become our story, and the harvest of that truth was more abundant than I had ever imagined. Yet, despite all the progress, one thought lingered in my heart: legacy. What would happen when I was gone? Would the bridges we built remain standing, or would they crumble with time? That question would drive me toward my final, most ambitious step, one that would ensure the foundation lived far beyond me. Because this journey was never just about proving my worth to one woman or even to one family. It was about reminding every elder, every overlooked soul, that they are not just anything. They are the keepers of history, the bearers of wisdom, and the anchors of tomorrow. And as I gazed out over the glowing lights of the garden, laughter echoing in the night, I knew the final chapter of this story was yet to be written.
The months rolled forward, and with them, the foundation blossomed beyond my wildest dreams. What began as a single booth at the fall festival had become a town-wide movement. The community garden flourished, its once bare soil now bursting with vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Children and elders alike proudly brought home baskets of fresh produce, not just for their tables, but for neighbors in need. It wasn't just food we were growing, it was dignity, togetherness, and hope. The local newspaper ran a feature on us, calling it the Heart of Whitmore. Soon after, a regional radio station invited me for an interview. I remember sitting nervously in that small studio, headphones pressed against my silver hair, the microphone gleaming before me. The host asked how it all began, and I told the story, not of humiliation, but of transformation. It started, I said, the moment I decided I was not just anything. That line stuck. It became a kind of slogan for the foundation. We are not just anything. Not just babysitters, not just old, not just forgotten. Each of us carried a story worth telling, a life worth sharing, and wisdom worth passing on. But with every step forward in the public eye, the tension at home deepened. My daughter-in-law no longer masked her disapproval with forced politeness. She openly sighed when I mentioned meetings. She made sharp comments at the dinner table about priorities and family first. Once, in a moment of raw frustration, she muttered, "If you want to be a celebrity, maybe you should stop living under our roof." The words cut, but they didn't break me. In the past, I might have shrunk back, apologized, or tried harder to please. But now I stood taller, even in silence. My son noticed, the children noticed, even the neighbors noticed. And slowly, my daughter-in-law began to realize she couldn't control the tide. One Sunday afternoon, everything came to a head. The neighborhood hosted a block gathering, a cheerful event with barbecues and music. I joined with the children, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables from our garden. Conversations swirled, and soon people asked me about the foundation. They wanted updates, they wanted stories, they wanted me. I spoke with passion, my voice steady and warm, explaining our latest project, a mentorship program pairing high school students with retirees skilled in trades like carpentry, sewing, and cooking. Applause broke out around me, neighbors nodding with admiration. For once, I wasn't invisible. I was celebrated. And then it happened. My daughter-in-law, standing nearby with folded arms, let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, don't get carried away. She's just the babysitter. That's all she's ever been." The months rolled forward, and with them, the foundation blossomed beyond my wildest dreams. What began as a single booth at the fall festival had become a town-wide movement. The community garden flourished, its once bare soil now bursting with vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Children and elders alike proudly brought home baskets of fresh produce, not just for their tables, but for neighbors in need. It wasn't just food we were growing, it was dignity, togetherness, and hope. The local newspaper ran a feature on us, calling it the Heart of Whitmore. Soon after, a regional radio station invited me for an interview.
I remember sitting nervously in that small studio, headphones pressed against my silver hair, the microphone gleaming before me. The host asked how it all began, and I told the story, not of humiliation, but of transformation. It started, I said, the moment I decided I was not just anything. That line stuck. It became a kind of slogan for the foundation. We are not just anything. Not just babysitters, not just old, not just forgotten. Each of us carried a story worth telling, a life worth sharing, and wisdom worth passing on. But with every step forward in the public eye, the tension at home deepened. My daughter-in-law no longer masked her disapproval with forced politeness. She openly sighed when I mentioned meetings. She made sharp comments at the dinner table about priorities and family first. Once, in a moment of raw frustration, she muttered, "If you want to be a celebrity, maybe you should stop living under our roof." The words cut, but they didn't break me. In the past, I might have shrunk back, apologized, or tried harder to please. But now I stood taller, even in silence. My son noticed, the children noticed, even the neighbors noticed. And slowly, my daughter-in-law began to realize she couldn't control the tide. One Sunday afternoon, everything came to a head. The neighborhood hosted a block gathering, a cheerful event with barbecues and music. I joined with the children, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables from our garden. Conversations swirled, and soon people asked me about the foundation. They wanted updates, they wanted stories, they wanted me. I spoke with passion, my voice steady and warm, explaining our latest project, a mentorship program pairing high school students with retirees skilled in trades like carpentry, sewing, and cooking. Applause broke out around me, neighbors nodding with admiration. For once, I wasn't invisible. I was celebrated. And then it happened. My daughter-in-law, standing nearby with folded arms, let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, don't get carried away. She's just the babysitter. That's all she's ever been."
Moments like that fueled me, even when the storm at home grew stronger. My daughter-in-law's disapproval became more vocal. She muttered about me being absent, about neighbors whispering, about her not having control. But my son, though torn, began to notice the change in me. One evening he pulled me aside. "Mom," he said quietly, "I've never seen you so alive. The kids look up to you more than ever. Don't let anyone dim that light." Tears blurred my vision. For years, I had craved those words, not from the community, but from my own child. And now, finally, he saw me. The tension at home didn't vanish, but I carried it differently. Each criticism from my daughter-in-law became fuel for my fire. Each sigh or glare reminded me that my worth was not hers to grant or deny. And so the Whitmore Family Foundation grew. We held gardening days, storytelling nights, and even partnered with the local school to create a Grand Friends program where students were paired with elders for mentorship. The joy in both young and old was undeniable. But I knew, deep down, that my biggest test had yet to come. The day would arrive when I would have to confront my daughter-in-law not with silence, but with truth. And when that day came, I would not back down. Because I had learned something powerful. Once you rediscover your worth, no one, not even family, can take it away. The community garden took root, literally and figuratively. What started as a patch of dirt behind the church became a vibrant space of laughter, sweat, and shared stories. Children dug with small shovels while elders showed them how to plant tomatoes, beans, and marigolds to keep pests away. Each day brought new lessons, not just in gardening, but in life itself. I remember watching young Ethan, no older than 7, crouch beside Mr. Harris, a widower in his 80s. The boy's hands were muddy, his knees grass-stained, yet he listened intently as Mr. Harris explained how patience was the secret to both gardening and living. "You can't rush growth," he said softly. "Not in plants, not in people." The boy nodded as though he understood every word, and my heart swelled. These were the moments I dreamed of, the bridges being built, one seed, one conversation at a time. Word spread quickly. Local newspapers ran a short article about our project, and suddenly strangers were calling, asking how they could help. Some offered donations, others volunteered their time. For the first time in decades, I felt the pulse of belonging, not as a shadow in someone else's home, but as a leader, a creator of something bigger than myself. But at home, the atmosphere grew tense. One evening, as I returned from the garden, covered in dirt but glowing with pride, my daughter-in-law confronted me in the kitchen. Her arms were crossed, her lips pressed thin. "You've been out late again," she said, her voice calm but edged with frost. "The kids needed you this afternoon. I had errands and you weren't here." I set down my gloves, careful not to track soil across the floor. "I left a note. I thought you saw it." She shook her head. "You're becoming unreliable. This whole foundation thing, it's distracting you from your real responsibility. You're supposed to help with this family, not run off chasing some hobby." Her words stung, not because they were true, but because of the way she said them. Supposed to, as though my only worth existed within the narrow boundaries she'd drawn for me. I steadied myself before replying. "I am helping this family, more than you realize. What I'm building isn't just a hobby, it's a legacy. It's something your children will benefit from too." Her eyes narrowed. "Or maybe it's something you're using to make yourself feel important." The silence between us was heavy. I wanted to argue, to shout that she couldn't see beyond her own pride. But instead, I swallowed my words and walked away. I had learned long ago that sometimes silence spoke louder than any defense. Yet that night, as I lay in bed, doubt crept in. Was I being selfish? Should I shrink myself again to keep peace in the household? The thought lingered until I remembered the faces at the garden, the children's laughter, the elders' smiles, the gratitude in the eyes of people who had been invisible for too long. That was my answer. I couldn't stop, not now. The next week, the foundation hosted its first official storytelling night. We gathered in the town hall, folding chairs arranged in a circle, the smell of coffee and fresh pie filling the air. Elders shared tales from their youth, stories of hardships, triumphs, and lessons learned through decades of living. Children listened with wide eyes, their imaginations sparking with every word. Parents, too, leaned in closer than they expected, surprised by how much they had never asked their own parents or grandparents. When it was my turn, I hesitated. For years, I had been the listener, not the speaker, but something inside urged me forward. I stood and cleared my throat. A few weeks ago, I was called just the babysitter. Those words cut deeper than I let on. But tonight, I want to tell you why they don't define me, and why they don't define any of us here. The room grew still. Every eye was on me. Every breath seemed to wait for mine. I am not just the babysitter. I am not just the cook, the cleaner, or the old woman sitting quietly in the corner. I am the bridge between past and future. I am the memory of where we've been and the guide for where we're going. And so are you. Each of you carries wisdom that this community cannot afford to lose. Applause erupted. It was not polite clapping, but thunderous, heartfelt, almost defiant, as if everyone in that room had been waiting for someone to say what they had always felt. Later that night, as I packed up, a teenage girl approached me. She held out a notebook, her hands trembling. Would you would you teach me how to write stories like you tell them? My grandma passed away last year, and I don't want to forget what she taught me. I placed my hand on hers. Of course, dear, that's exactly why we're here.
Her mother, standing nearby, nodded thoughtfully. This sounds wonderful. How can we join? And just like that, my first family signed up. Then another and another. By the end of the day, my sign-up sheet was nearly full. I walked home with tired feet, but a heart so full it felt as if it might burst. That evening, when my son asked casually how the festival went, I smiled and said only, "Better than I expected." My daughter-in-law raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Perhaps she thought it was just another hobby that would fizzle out. But inside, I knew the spark had become a flame. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. We held our first official gathering in the church basement, a modest room with folding chairs and coffee urns. A dozen families showed up. Grandparents with shy smiles, parents curious but cautious, and children buzzing with energy. I stood at the front, nervous at first, but when I began speaking, the words flowed like an old river finding its course. Too often, I told them, we forget that the strongest roots are the ones we cannot see. Grandparents, elders, neighbors with silver hair and lined hands, you are those roots. And children, you are the branches, reaching for the sky. What we build together, across generations, will last longer than any one of us alone. The room grew still, every eye fixed on me. I saw heads nodding, tears glistening, children leaning against grandparents with new respect. And in that silence, I realized I was no longer invisible. By the end of the night, we had decided on our first project, a community garden tended by elders and children side by side. The excitement was contagious. People signed up to donate tools, seeds, and time. And when the meeting ended, no one rushed to leave. They lingered, chatting, laughing, planning together. As I packed up my things, one woman touched my arm. "Thank you," she said softly. "My father has been so lonely since my mother passed. Tonight, I saw him smile for the first time in months." Her words stayed with me long after the chairs were folded and the lights were turned out. That was the proof I needed. This was bigger than me, bigger than my pain. This was about giving dignity back to every elder who had been dismissed as just anything. But I also knew this: not everyone would welcome the change. My daughter-in-law in particular seemed unsettled by the growing buzz around me. She watched closely, her polite smiles thinner than before. Perhaps she worried that my rising voice would cast a shadow on hers, or perhaps she simply didn't understand yet what I was trying to build. Either way, I wasn't going to stop. For the first time in years, I was building something of my own, not for validation, but for legacy. And deep inside, I whispered to myself, this is only the beginning.
The following week, I carried myself differently. My daughter-in-law didn't notice at first. Why would she? To her, nothing had changed. I was still there every morning, helping with the children's breakfasts, tying their shoelaces and waving them off to school. But inside, a shift had taken place. I no longer saw myself as an accessory to their lives. I saw myself as the root, the one quietly nourishing the branches. One afternoon, after the children were dropped at school, I sat in the library. I hadn't been there in years, yet the familiar scent of paper and ink greeted me like an old friend. I combed through books on community building, nonprofit organizations, and local history.
Each page felt like a step forward. I scribbled notes in the margins of a worn notebook I carried everywhere. "Grandma, you still studying at your age?" the librarian teased gently as she stamped a pile of books for me. I smiled. "We never stop learning, do we? Not unless we choose to." At home, the evenings grew into a rhythm of quiet determination. While others watched television or scrolled through phones, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook and jar of savings, sketching out what would become the Whitmore Family Foundation. It was just a name then, written in shaky cursive across the top of the page, but to me, it was a promise. The idea wasn't simply to create a club or a charity. I wanted to build a bridge between generations. Too often, I had seen children dismiss their elders as outdated, while elders sat quietly, convinced their time had passed. But what if we could connect the two? What if young people could sit at the feet of those who had walked through wars, depressions, and revolutions of the heart? What if we reminded them that wisdom is not found on a screen, but in the beating heart of someone who has lived? My first opportunity came sooner than I expected. The town announced a fall festival, a cheerful event with pie contests, pumpkin carving, and booths for local organizations. It was small, but it was a stage. I scraped together enough money to rent a tiny booth. With colored markers borrowed from the children and poster boards bought on sale, I spent nights drawing up a simple sign: Whitmore Family Foundation, building bridges between generations. When the day arrived, I set up my booth with trembling hands. I placed a plate of homemade cookies at the corner, next to my brochures, really just sheets of paper I'd typed up with a list of goals: storytelling nights, sewing lessons, gardening workshops, and mentorship programs. At first, people passed by politely, their eyes drawn instead to the candy stalls or carnival games. A part of me wondered if my daughter-in-law had been right. Maybe I was just a babysitter after all, too old to make a dent in this busy world. But just as doubt crept in, a little girl stopped at my booth. She picked up a cookie and smiled. "What's a bridge between generations?" she asked. I leaned down, met her curious eyes, and said, "It means you get to learn from someone who's lived a long time, someone who can teach you things you can't find in books, like how to grow a garden, or how to bake bread, or how to tell a story that makes you laugh and cry at the same time." Her face lit up, like my grandma used to. Later that evening, after the house had grown quiet, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my hands. These were the same hands that had washed dishes, sewn clothes, packed lunches, and wiped away tears for decades. They were strong hands, though wrinkled, and they carried the history of a lifetime. I thought of how easily I had been reduced to just the babysitter and felt something inside me shift. I realized that if I didn't reclaim my worth, I would be buried under other people's labels until the day I died. That thought sent a chill through me. I had lived too long, given too much, and endured too many storms to let my legacy be defined by one careless remark. So I made a decision that night. Instead of shrinking into silence, I would rise. I would show not only my daughter-in-law, but my entire family that my value was greater than they could imagine. I would prove, not with anger or bitterness, but with action, that a grandmother's role is far more powerful than just babysitting. The next morning, I began writing. At first, I didn't know what I was writing for. I filled pages with thoughts, memories, and lessons I wanted to pass on. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but the words poured out like water breaking through a dam. Each story I wrote carried a piece of who I was: a young girl who had survived hardships, a wife who had endured loss, a mother who had raised children, and now a grandmother trying to hold her family together. As I wrote, an idea sparked in my mind. What if I could turn all of this, the stories, the savings I had tucked away, the time and love I still carried, into something bigger than myself? Something that would not only show my family my worth, but also help others who felt invisible, like I had. The thought of starting something new at my age seemed foolish at first. Who would listen to me? Who would care? But then I remembered that strength isn't about age, it's about purpose. And my purpose had just been handed to me in the form of a cruel remark. So over the next weeks, I quietly began to plan. I gathered old notebooks, clipped out articles, and researched ideas at the library. I wanted to create something lasting, something that would remind the world that grandmothers are not relics to be shelved away. We are the backbone of families, the keepers of wisdom, and the silent protectors who make homes feel like homes. I started small. I took a little jar of savings I had kept hidden for years. Money I'd squirreled away from sewing jobs, small gifts, and birthday cash I never spent. It wasn't much, but it was enough to begin. I told myself, this is not the end of me. This is the beginning. At night, when the house was quiet, I imagined what this could grow into. I saw a foundation where elders could share their skills, teach children forgotten crafts, and pass down the values of respect, patience, and kindness. I pictured community events where generations sat side by side, not as separate worlds, but as one family, learning from each other. The more I dreamed, the stronger I felt. And though I hadn't yet spoken a word of this plan to my family, I carried a quiet fire in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt alive with purpose. But deep down, I also knew this. The path I was setting out on would not be easy. My daughter-in-law would not understand it first. My son might think I was wasting my time. The neighbors might gossip, but none of that mattered anymore. Because once you've been stripped down to just the babysitter, you either crumble or you rise. And I had decided to rise. The day it happened is carved in my memory, not because I wanted to hold on to it, but because it forced me to see the truth about where I stood in my own family. It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind where the sun paints everything in golden light and the air smells of fresh cut grass. Neighbors were gathered outside, chatting and laughing while children ran up and down the sidewalks. I had brought a plate of cookies out for the kids, as I always did, balancing the tray in my hands while my daughter-in-law stood beside me, waving politely to the neighbors. She looked beautiful that morning, dressed smartly, with her hair neatly styled. I thought we were a team, standing side by side, presenting our family with pride. But then one of the neighbors, Mrs. Green, smiled warmly at me and said, "You must be so proud to spend time with your grandkid every day." Before I could answer, my daughter-in-law laughed, a quick, sharp laugh that didn't carry kindness. She shook her head and said loudly, "Oh, she's just the babysitter." Just the babysitter. The word sliced through me sharper than any knife. For a moment I froze, unable to breathe, unable to even set down the plate of cookies in my hands. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others pretending not to hear. But I heard. I felt every syllable land on me like a weight, pressing me down into the earth beneath my shoes. I forced a smile, though it trembled at the corners, and I whispered something polite. But inside, I was burning, burning with humiliation, with sadness, and yes, with anger. I wasn't just anything. I was the one who had rocked those children to sleep, kissed their scraped knees, told them stories when thunderstorms shook the house. I was the one who knew which lullabies calmed them, which foods they refused to eat, and which dreams they whispered to me in confidence. But to my daughter-in-law, in that moment, I was only a convenience.